The people of Labrador realize how effective it has been, and they know now they need to stick together.
Tonight, the trial continues with a Crown Corporation up against people defending the land.
I will not answer questions or make comments on the negative stuff, because we have far more important issues.
Re-elected FSIN Chief Bobby Cameron vows to move on after a rocky campaign. And a tribute to the iconic Alanis Obomsawin. Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward. The Provincial Supreme Court in Happy Valley, Goose Bay, Labrador heard testimony from land protectors this week. More than a dozen people who occupied the Muskrat Falls Dam site say they were defending their Indigenous rights. APTN's Angel Moore has been covering the proceedings and has this report.
6 Labrador land protectors testified this week, and they all say they're not guilty of violating an injunction in resistance to the Muskrat Falls Dam. Annette Hollett told the court that in October 2016, her son wanted to join the protest to stand up for his beliefs.
And I've heard people express their concerns, and I realized that I had the same concerns, and if they're not going to take my 12-year-old son seriously, then maybe they'll take me seriously a little bit more.
Under cross-examination, Hollett said she didn't know about the injunction. Linda Saunders McLean says she too didn't see an injunction order and no one told her she was breaking the law. She says she joined the occupation in hopes of preventing methylmercury poisoning in traditional foods.
And I was walking on land that belonged to my ancestors and who trapped and hunted and fished and gathered for many, many years, long before Nalcor was ever invented.
Saunders McLean went on to say it's an injustice that a corporation can make decisions impacting Indigenous people's lives without consulting them. David Nook of Sheshatshiu First Nation says he's disappointed Nalcor, the Crown Corporation building the dam, and the government are resolving these issues in court. But he says the occupation was historic in bringing together all groups in Labrador at a time when their future is filled with uncertainty.
And I think if any movement was to take place in the future on another different front, I think the people of Labrador realize how effective it has been, and they know now they need to stick together to be heard and to be strong.
Nalcor presented video evidence and testimony from their security guards to identify the land protectors, who say they united to raise their voices against Muskrat Falls. The trial is expected to resume late winter or early spring. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Happy Valley, Goose Bay.
Victoria Island is a significant cultural and spiritual place for Indigenous peoples in the Ottawa area. It's located close to Parliament Hill, but it will be off limits for the next 7 years. As Todd Lamarand explains, the closure caught an Aboriginal tourism organization off guard.
A group of visitors is getting a dose of Indigenous culture on Victoria Island. An Ottawa-based organization called Aboriginal Experiences is behind it. Its executive director is Trina Mather-Samard. She stresses the importance of the island for Algonquin people in Ottawa.
Absolutely it is, and I think a centre where the Algonquin people can welcome all the rest of the Indigenous and non-Indigenous residents down to participate in our traditional activities and that as well.
Beyond the cultural events, Victoria Island has hosted ceremonies and gatherings. Former Attawapiskat Chief Teresa Spence held a weeks-long hunger strike here. Many rallies held on Parliament Hill begin or end with marches to or from the island.
And, you know, outside of our tourism programs and groups, it's very much, like you mentioned, a centre for the community.
But at the end of October, all activities here will end for the next 7 years. The National Capital Commission, NCC, tested the soil at the west end of the island, formerly the site of decades of heavy industry. In a statement to APTN News, the NCC said, "There are unacceptable risks on the west side of the island to both human health and the environment, and that work should be initiated to address these risks. The only way to access the island is through this road on the west side."
But of course, that's our access point and that as well. So I think when they did some further testing up there, they discovered that it was leading to a point of concern for health.
Mather Samar understands the need for the work, which means removing soil all the way down to the bedrock and replacing it with clean material, but was still surprised by the announcement.
Initially, they were hoping to start the work within 2 weeks. So for us, it was going to be 2 weeks. We operate every season here till the end of October. So they did discuss and they're starting the closures, but allowing us access till the end of the month for October so we can finish out the 2018 season.
But what happens to their cultural programs next year is still up in the air.
We're actually looking at 3 or 4 different locations that we can offer our programs in and maybe, reinvent some of our programs and what we deliver as well, but nothing too finalized.
The NCC will help Aboriginal experiences move and find another site. On October 30th, a potluck feast on the island will be the final activity for 7 years. Todd Lamarand, APTN National News, Ottawa.
And we'd like to hear what you think. Here's how to continue the conversation. Send your emails to news@aptn.ca. Find us online at aptnnews.ca and on youtube.com/aptnnews. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for the latest Indigenous news. Bobby Cameron has been re-elected as Chief of the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations and as AFN Regional Chief. Cameron received overwhelming support despite an election campaign full of controversy. Delegates in Saskatoon voted on Thursday. In late September, Saskatoon police were called to FSIN headquarters. In an unrelated matter, police also confirm an investigation into an individual or individuals at FSIN is ongoing and was launched in November 2017. Earlier this week, media reported FSIN paid an anonymous hacker who breached its computer system a ransom of $20,000. Cameron took aim at the media in his acceptance speech.
I will not answer questions or make comments on the negative stuff, because we have far more important issues. If you want to talk about housing, if you want to talk about the child welfare system, if you want to talk about post-secondary, I'm more than happy to answer the questions to the media. That is our focus moving forward.
The Indigenous Knowledge and Wisdom Center officially opened their doors today in Edmonton. The nonprofit's goal is to gather and store information and knowledge from elders. The knowledge will be taught to the 15,000 Indigenous youth in band-operated schools across Alberta. The center is also developing a free online virtual library where students can access course materials.
I see it as being a kind of a vault for our knowledge, our history, and everything like that, and as being a source for our schools, Alberta-wide, First Nation-wide, that we can access information from, elders' stories and the history of Alberta, the history of First Nations people. We could access some place to go to access all of this information that we need for our schools.
Police services have released the latest results from a joint crackdown on human trafficking. More on that after the break. Here's a look at Saturday's weather forecast starting on the East Coast. +4 under the sun for Charlottetown, 8 and rain for St. John's. -2 in Happy Valley Goose Bay, +2 and snow for Nain. 4 above with rain for Montreal, +1 in Saguenay. In southern Ontario, 7 above with rain for London, 5 and showers for Toronto. 7 and rain for Thunder Bay, 6 with showers for Sioux Lookout and Wawa. A rain-snow mix for Puckatawagan with a high of +3, 4 above for God's Lake. 9 and rain for Winnipeg, Gimli and Barons River. In Saskatchewan, 12 with showers for Estevan, 10 in North Battleford and Saskatoon, plus 6 in Meadow Lake, 5 above in Uranium City. Welcome back. The RCMP's Human Trafficking Centre recently released the latest results from Operation Northern Spotlight, a joint police effort that focused on targeting human trafficking in Ontario. Our Thunder Bay reporter Willow Fiddler joins us to talk about those results now. Willow, thanks for joining us. What can you tell us about this latest police operation?
This is what police are calling the 7th edition of Operation Northern Spotlight. It was led by the RCMP's Human Trafficking Centre and Ontario Provincial Police. Over a 7-day period, 45 police services in Ontario joined efforts to help victims and potential victims of human trafficking.
And so what did police find?
Well, we have a few different numbers to share with you. Police said that they were able to ensure the safety of 7 individuals in exploitive situations. Of those 7, we know that 2 of them were minors. We also know that all 7 were recovered by police in Southern Ontario, although we don't know where these individuals are from. Police say they also charged a total of 15 people with 45 different charges, including forcible confinement, trafficking in persons, aggravated assault, and pointing a firearm. During that week-long period, which was just last week, police say they also engaged with more than 200 potential victims, individuals believed to be at risk of being exploited or trafficked.
So what happens to those potential victims?
In their news release, the OPP said they've offered immediate and future supports from community-based agencies, although we don't know how many of these individuals are receiving those supports.
And so what does this mean for Thunder Bay?
In an emailed statement to APTN, Thunder Bay Police said they were able to contact 10 women involved in the sex trade here in the city. And one of the concerns that we continue to see and hear in Thunder Bay, particularly on social media, are reports of attempted abductions. Last month, we asked Thunder Bay Police whether those are related to gang activity or human trafficking, and they released a video indicating that it is not connected. But that's not what we're hearing from community-based agencies or groups like the Bear Clan Patrol or a local women's shelter. They say that the attempted abductions are definitely related to human trafficking. These groups are also saying that there's a knowledge gap between the city and local police about what human trafficking is, but they're working to help educate and create awareness on that issue.
You met up with the Thunder Bay Bear Clan Patrol recently. What did they have to say?
Yeah, I met up with one of the team leaders, Ivory, Tuesday, and here's just a little bit about what she had to say on this.
The public needs to be educated on what's going on. So does healthcare workers, signs of what to look for when people are being trafficked, because saying that it's not happening goes against everybody collectively coming together against this. So.
Willow, you've made some calls to some of the other police forces. What did they tell you?
I've reached out to the RCMP and OPP, but haven't had a response from either of them yet. We'll be bringing you more on this story as we're hoping to hear more from the community-based agencies on this issue.
Important story, Willow. Thanks for bringing us up to speed here today.
Thanks, Dennis.
The Quebec inquiry was born out of accusations that the provincial police were abusing Indigenous women in Val-d'Or. The head of Quebec's provincial police force testified today. Tom Fenario has that story.
J'ai plein de caméras en avant de moi. Là. Ce que je veux là, aujourd'hui, là, c'est une enquête indépendante au Québec puis à Val-d'Or. Il faut que ça commence ici. C'est ici que ça commence. Il faut arrêter là, de fermer les yeux.
This was the reaction in November 2016 to the news that 6 provincial police officers in Val-d'Or, Quebec would not be charged after allegations of abuse. What's become known as the Val-d'Or crisis did in fact lead to an inquiry. Today, the head of the Quebec Provincial Police, or SQ, testified before the commission.
Very anxious to read the comments that you will issue us at the end of your commission. I hope that when you will have drafted your recommendations, I hope that we will already have corrected some of the situations that you will be drafting about.
The SQ testified about actions they have taken to improve relations since accusations came out 3 years ago. But the inquiry spent much of the hearing grilling the SQ regarding follow-up on cases of discrimination presented to the inquiry.
In this specific case, we're talking of a woman who's 5'2", who's not armed, who's a passenger, who ends up with her face in the snow at minus 12 Celsius when it just snowed, and it becomes the woman's fault in a certain sense. Well, we could probably ask the Professional Standards Department if this file is still open. We're asking the Sûreté, the SQ, for an answer, but you don't have an answer. You don't even know at this moment if there's somebody who is reviewing this file that had been presented here 4 months ago.
The SQ was also unable to provide answers for a police report that used racist language. At the end, Inquiry Commissioner Vien had this to say to the SQ commanders in attendance.
On s'adresse à vous, Mme Séguin, M. Pelletier, les leaders. Ce sont des gens qui doivent inculquer une culture de respect.
The inquiry will wrap up hearings in November. Tom Fenario, APTN National News, Montreal.
Inuit in northern Quebec are being killed and injured by their own police force at an alarming rate. APTN video journalist Tom Fenario is joining us now to talk about an upcoming episode of APTN Investigates devoted to this topic. Tom, thanks for joining us. What is going on with police violence in subarctic Quebec?
Well, the Inuit like to refer to subarctic Quebec as Nunavik, and the police force that polices Nunavik is the Kativik Regional Police Force, and they are shooting and killing and seriously injuring people at a rate that is 55 times that of the Montreal Police, to give you an example. Now, technically, the Kativik Regional Police Force is an Indigenous police force. However, in reality, they have 48 patrol officers, and only 3 of them are Inuit. So you have this situation where you have a population that's being policed by people that don't really speak the mother tongue of the Inuit, Inuktitut. So it's leading to a lot of, and with this elevated level of violence, and you have a police force that doesn't speak this language, you have a really high tensions up there.
And so what did your investigation uncover?
Basically, a litany of grievances. One thing that kept coming up is people were wondering about why the police didn't get less lethal force options for a very long time. People were complaining for 4 years that the police needed tasers, so guns weren't always the go-to option. Right. Finally, the police did receive tasers, but only this year after, again, 4 years of complaining. I spoke to a lot of family members who sadly have lost people to the hands of police violence, and one thing that kept coming up to them is often these situations happen after like standoff situations, right? And so people were saying, how come we don't have police negotiators who speak Inuktitut, or why don't we have an elder or people from the community there to help police, if not do translation, at least to help negotiate, so these situations don't always end in such violence of death or serious injury.
So what has been the police response to this?
Well, nobody doubts that the police up there have a tough job to do. Nunavik, unfortunately, has high rates of addiction and social issues, and there's never a hunting rifle far from reach up there, right? The Inuit, huge hunting culture. So often you have these really volatile situations that just arise. In fact, the police did lose one of their own back in 2014. Officer Steve Derry was killed responding to a domestic violence call. Another officer that same evening was also seriously injured. So I guess the police, what they told me is they're in a situation where they are understaffed, under-equipped to deal with the realities of policing Nunavik. They are currently in negotiations with the federal government to get more funding for things like equipment and additional officers. But those negotiations are ongoing. When we asked the federal government, specifically Public Safety Canada, to be interviewed for this story, they declined.
The episode of tonight's Investigates is called Necessary Force. Why did you give it that title?
Necessary force, or also reasonable force, is a police term used to describe what is appropriate amount of physical force to use to put an end to a situation. And it's very open-ended sometimes about what is appropriate, and I felt this story is a bit open-ended. It tries to give a good balanced approach as to what is necessary force and how that term could perhaps be downgraded. Is there a way to make things, can the necessary force be less lethal force, I guess is what the story aims to answer.
Right. All right, Tom, it looks good. Looking forward to seeing it tonight. Thanks for talking to us about it here today.
Thanks for having me, Dennis.
And you can watch that entire episode of APTN Investigates in about 7 minutes' time. Time for another quick break, but stick around. There's more to come. Here's the rest of Saturday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta. 10 above under the sun for Grand Prairie. 10 and showers for Peace River. 14 and sunny in Medicine Hat. 1 degree warmer under the sun in Lethbridge. On the west coast, 12 for Campbell River, Vancouver and Victoria, showers in all. +9 in Fort Nelson, +8 in Smithers, 7 above under the sun for Prince George. 1 above for Dawson and Mayo, +6 and sunny for Whitehorse. 7 above for Fort Liard and Trout Lake, -5 and sunny skies for Norman Wells. -6 in Inuvik, -5 for Colville Lake and Fort McPherson. 0s in Arviette, Whale Cove, Chesterfield, and Baker Lake. -6 in Repulse Bay. -2 in Pangertung. -17 in Resolute. Welcome back. The City of Montreal wanted to honor the documentary filmmaker and musician Alanis Obomsawin with a mural. Niki Ottawa, an Atikamekw artist from Manawan, was chosen by organizers to take part in the Montreal's Great Artists Series, which will be officially unveiled November 5th. Ottawa believes Obomsawin is an inspiration for many Indigenous artists and thinks Montreal could benefit from some indigenization.
On a besoin de plus de représentation autochtone et d'auto-représentation aussi. Et il faut, c'est important pour nous de s'auto-représenter aussi et laisser la marque aussi pour les prochaines générations qui vont venir après nous.
And she certainly is an inspiration. That is all the time we have for tonight. Don't forget you can tune in tomorrow for APTN National News Weekend. And there's much more on our website, aptnnews.ca. Stick around, and an all-new episode of APTN Investigates is up next. But before we go tonight, this week we've been bringing you stories from one of Nunavut's artistic capitals, Cape Dorset. Here's a closer look at the collection from Cape Dorset's Cultural Centre. It's a mix of the new 2018 Dorset Prints collection and a few rarely seen items from their archives. Enjoy. I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great weekend.